and out, that would be great. So I think we've had some great panels this morning. We've talked about decarbonization. We've talked about what's happening if we go past 1.5 degrees. This panel, I think, is going to be a little bit more solution-oriented because we're going to talk about energy and specifically where we are and what the different energy solutions are going to be. And so what I'm going to do is introduce the panel. And I'll actually have you guys introduce yourself briefly. So why don't we start with you?
Okay, so hi. Okay, is it working? No? Do I need to press
Push the
something?
button up.
No? Ah, perfect. So hi, my name is Sandra Trittin. I'm actually here from Switzerland, and I'm a serial entrepreneur in the clean tech space. So I have several startups that I'm running, especially focused in the energy space. So it's about connecting different kind of assets on a software platform and aligning the consumer demand with the needs of the grid. It's also called virtual power plants. Probably some of you have heard that phrase at one point in time. I have several board seats in funds, investment funds, but also other tech startups, and I have a consulting platform for independent energy consultants in case anyone is looking for some support in that topic.
Do you ever find people that aren't looking for money?
No.
My name is David Hamilton Nichols. I'm from the United States, and I'm an investor in companies that are solving some of the world's biggest problems in multiple sectors. As far as renewable energy goes, my greatest interest lies in companies that are in niches that are not as explored. For example, distributed generation and solving the problems that the middle markets, rather than you've seen rooftop solar and you've seen these huge projects in the middle of nowhere. So that's an example of what I would say is finding somewhere in that middle that is less tapped.
Abby?
Hi, I'm Abby Ross. I am an entrepreneur first in travel, then education and healthcare. And I love building businesses that have real solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Right now, climate is one of those. And I created the Resiliency Company ultimately to help adapt our infrastructure to the fact that civilization has had a stable climate for the past 12,000 years, and now we don't. There are floods, wildfires, hurricanes, extreme heat, and we have to change all of our infrastructure because of that.
Thank you so much. So good morning. My name is Stéphane Olivier. I'm French. I'm actually an auto entrepreneur also. Living in Brazil, we choose to develop a solution for businesses to make them an automatic solution based on AI to produce ESG reports and a better accounting, perfect governance on automatism. So AI is supporting us by scanning all the laws all the time and just adapting all the programming so that entrepreneurs are able to adapt on the constant evaluating situation by governments and etc. So we just offer a permanent solution, easy access, and obviously much reliable solution. So this is fully governance stuff on climate situation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for all of you. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Scott Wharton. I'm the CEO of a company called Tandem PV, and we are a next generation solar panel maker. So we're making a panel that's 30 to 40% more efficient and ultimately better and cheaper than the ones today. And we're working on bringing the supply chain from China, which is today in the mid 90s%, back to the United States. That's one of the things I'm doing. So I want to set the frame for the panel with a couple of things. So one is there's a lot of discussion about AI and energy. So I think there's clearly, we're going to need a lot more energy. So I don't think we need to set it up with AI needs more, but let's just say that's a fact. And then we can talk about how much more. And then I also just want to share, I confirmed some of the statistics on energy for 2024. So I used ChatGPT this morning. And in the US, in 2024 already, 80% of the new energy added in 2024 was solar and batteries. So it was about 60% of all new energy came from solar, 20% from batteries, 13% from wind. So we're already at more than 90% adding renewable energy capacity. Now that's not the overall capacity, but that's the US. So for fun, what I wanted to do is, in teeing this off, is like, that's the US, but what about China? Because we know China is the world's biggest emitter and has about a third of the energy. And what was fascinating, it was the same. It was actually the same ratio. About 60% solar, a little bit more in batteries and wind, and in nuclear, gas, and coal and everything, less than 10% last year. And just one other stat on solar in China. Last year, they deployed 300 gigawatts of solar power. That's more than the United States has deployed in the entire 68 years of the history of deploying solar. Just to give you an order of magnitude. So just setting that as a framework, because we're going to talk about, if we're going to talk about where the future, talk about where we are. So why don't we start with the question, maybe rapid fire for all of you. In the next 10 years, not that far out, how much more electricity are we going to need? And I asked that with the caveat that it used to be we were flat to not growing at all. Everybody here at Davos saying we need a lot more energy. How much?
So I can give you one fact that I also read this morning, actually not on ChatGPT, but online, which is that by 2030 in Ireland, 1/3 of the energy consumption will purely come from data centers, right? And also, if we look at the different areas of electrification, you have transport, you have building, you have the consumer himself, like all of us, right, with all our mobiles and stuff, and then we add additionally the data centers. So even if we increase efficiency as well tremendously, I would say it will for sure increase by 20%.
20 in 10, so 10 years, 20%.
I would think with the data centers and the electrification of the transport.
All right, so we have the first person who
Yes.
threw a marker down, 20.
Just
David.
I will actually go much higher. I spoke with a couple of my founders in the energy sector who are very plugged into things going on, and I would say anywhere between the two of them, I got 2 to 3 times the amount we have now. And note that it took us 150 years to get to the energy production we are at now. So to double or triple that in a short time frame is a tremendous undertaking. However, we are in the beginning of what I would call an AI energy arms race, which, for better or worse, is going to create a lot of disruption in our lives as energy is needed for that. And a certain area we might see some destabilization in some areas that may not have enough energy, may have some blackouts. So we need to get all the sources of energy we can, because that curve of data centers and AI is going to hockey stick. So I'll be the contrarian to your 20% and say we might see as high as double or triple the amount needed. Whether we get there or not is a different question. But if we don't, it has some destabilizing influences.
Okay, double or triple. Abby.
McKinsey report says 3x by 2050.
So what do you think in the next 10 years then?
Next 10 years, I think we're looking at 1.5.
1.5.
Yeah.
So 50% increase.
Yeah. So, and one of the important things when we talk about how hungry for energy AI is if we don't think about where we are building these, data centers and grids, we're going to have a major problem swapping kind of one resource for another, which is water. Cooling is required. So being smart about the overall energy grid, the stack, and the location that we're putting these things is really important to how we adapt to a future that requires more technology, more energy.
Stefano, what do you think?
So my thought is really based on the country where I live at the moment, which is Brazil. By fact, we know that in the state of Ceará, which is in the northeast of Brazil, we've got the 3rd biggest solar park produced by Chinese being installed at the moment, and the plan is to install the biggest solar park in the world there too in the next few years. The investment on sustainability and mainly power by hydrogen, by the way, also, which is a big subject there, is something that involve about 30 billion investments in the next 5 years. So my thought in terms of energy, 50% is the minimum. This is what I think. I really believe we will need much more than that. Because I live there, first of the year, I live in the best area of the city where I live, which is Fortaleza in case. We did not have energy for the new year. So this is just giving you an aspect of the situation there. And based on Degel, which is a specific military staff from US, the population in Brazil is growing, so we will probably require much more energy than supposed to.
Okay. I'm going to come in at 75 just because I think the U.S. is now growing at about 6%, so it's 4% more than historical averages. And if you think about Brazil and other non-OECD countries, it's going to probably need a lot more power.
This, to me, well, we have to understand that Brazil at the moment produces 90% of its energy. It's a clean energy already. So just to give an example on gas situation or petroleum and things like that, Brazil is one of the countries which since the 1970s is using alcohol as a fuel. 70% of the car park is accepting alcohol instead of gasoline. So in terms of energy, we are also with the company, the startup I'm a founder of, we have very specific agreements with Totum and international situation regarding the carbon credit, which is in fact IREX based on solar panels. So what we observe is that nobody is complying yet, but now we have to comply. So the power, the amount of energy we need is far to be at the level we need.
Okay, so we're going to need, you want to jump in?
Yes, what I really find interesting, and I also join your numbers in the long run, is it's all about the execution, right? And since you were asking for 2035, right? I think this is in the end the most interesting question. On one side, how quickly do we get the data centers deployed, but also how quickly do we get the grids adapted, and how quickly do we get the additional energy supply?
So this is exactly the point where I wanted to also point out. What I got my own solar park in Brazil. It's built since 4 months. I'm still not connected to the grid because they did not do what they were supposed to do. So we have an issue with the main power companies, which are not just liking us, trying to help. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
So
crazy situation.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do now is go through each of the different energy sources. Let's talk about what our predictions are for each of them, and we can start with now the incrementally largest solar panels. So we already established that it's about 80% incremental, both in the US and China and many other places, but that's only incremental. That's not on the base load. Obviously, there are some limitations where the sun only shines during the day, and batteries are getting better. But what is the prediction moving forward in the next, I'll keep again 10 years, because I think it's a reasonable horizon for how much solar will grow and be part of that mix. Do you think it will continue to be this 80%? Will it go up or down? 80% is already pretty high. And I think for each of these questions, we don't need each of you to answer it. So maybe some of you can jump in, and then we'll go back and forth. Who wants it?
The use cases in which solar is deployed, I think, will shift. You know, as we have more weather-related events, solar is so good because of its microgrid capacity and its ability to provide critical services. You know, during times of eruption, solar is also as a source, I think, the quickest to adapt to change. You know, when we have extreme heat events, a lot of times in places like Arizona and California, solar panels will go down because they heat up too high. We've invented, you know, paint to make sure that they don't overheat. So I think as an energy source, because of some of the nimbleness and the adaptation and the ability to be local, we will find that we find the best use cases for solar and kind of nail in on where that sits in the energy grid.
I would add that is how much solar continues to grow is subject and dependent to how much we improve the cost on battery technologies and the production on battery technologies. Because solar is very useful and is very nimble, as she said, but we are going to need to see, and I think we have the potential to see quite an improvement and a curve also on the battery technologies.
So batteries in the last 10 years have come down 70%. So I think that's part of the benefit.
Provided that continues, and we also get some different technologies there.
Do you think it will continue? And what do you think about also, it's not just about short-term storage for the energy, it's also about medium and long-term. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I'm not as much an expert on the short and long-term versus long-term storage aspects of that. So is anyone else here on that?
Well, what I've seen on the market is a new kind of batteries based on sand, and because I live once again in Brazil in the Northeast, we've got a lot.
You have a lot of sand.
I think that might be a very interesting solution. So, and it's a very powerful securing energy stuff battery, and it's clean. So, yeah.
Yeah, probably to add on that, I think on the short-term storage and the local storage, for example, on residential housing, for sure we will see a further decrease. And then interestingly, currently we are also sitting on one of the biggest storage capabilities that we have, which is water storage. Here in Switzerland, you have all the water dams, etc. And even though they are not easy to deploy everywhere, right? Because in Brazil, in certain kind of areas, might be also easier to go with the sand option. But we have to think also in the way of storing energy as we have it already.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how many in the audience have heard about perovskites? One, but you're my wife, so you know, it's kind of cheating. Anybody else? Well, I'll just add in that because that's one of the things that my company is working on. It's a next generation solar technology that we basically take an ink. There's no rare earth metals or minerals. It's 1 micron thick and uses about 10% of the energy of current silicon. So we're commercializing that now. Start selling next year. I think that's part of the next generation of, I think the current solar panels are already very mature, and this will just drive it one level further, just adding into the thought mix of where it's going. I mean, the other thing I'd add about solar, and batteries, they're probably the only things that are actually very scalable in that you can make them in a factory, like you don't make fossil fuels in a factory. Nuclear takes a long time to produce, and it's scalable in that I think if you were in the panel here earlier, they said 900 gigawatts of capacity already in place, which we can make every year.
I would add, to what you're saying on solar versus nuclear and some others. Nuclear, although at some point down the line could be a very viable solution, that's not in the next 10 years. There's the cost associated, also certain regulatory things. If you're looking at different size reactors and new technology in that, we are not going to see that solving the problem in the shorter term. It could be great way down the line, but where we have the biggest issues in the energy transition is within the next 10 years or so. That is when we have all the increase in demand due to AI and data centers and other increasing demand. So if we're depending on that to be the solution, it's too far out. So we need something in that interim.
So how far out is too far out?
Well, in my opinion, it's going to be 10 to 15 years because of regulatory and other factors before we'd see that, and we are going to see a lot of increase in demand in the meantime.
Yeah.
Do you mind? Yeah, okay. So there is another situation I've noticed on the market. So in the south of Brazil, you've got Iguaçu Falls, right? Which is a very big production plant. Actually, this is shared between Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. We are in a conflict. We have too much energy, and some companies don't sell the energy. They just lose the energy. So there is still a political and economical situation that is not resolved, whereas the energy exists, and we don't provide it. So
Is there nuclear energy in Latin
no,
America?
hydro.
Only hydro, but no nuclear today?
There is only one plant in Brazil for nuclear, and then actually we are doing their ASG. So.
Okay. Are there any panelists who are enthusiastic about nuclear, who think it's going to contribute a lot to our needs in the next 10 years?
I prefer the panels, but if we observe it on a sustainable side, on the roof, it's much better. It's already built, instead of cutting trees and planting solar panels, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So science and regulation aside, the other challenges that we'll hit is, we're, especially in the US, we're not great at financing innovation. Everything is first of a kind. So recognizing that there's going to be a whole nother set of delays on how you drive investment into that, energy source that even after we hit all the other hurdles, what it looks like to get done in places and scaled and connected to the grid.
Yeah, and add to that, last year at Davos, Oliver Stone did a movie showing, and I had the privilege of seeing it. It was about positive aspects of nuclear energy, which was a surprise for Oliver Stone. And he talked about how we should be embracing nuclear, except he left one thing out, at which I asked him at the end, how much does it cost? And I think the problem with nuclear is it's usually about 5 times the cost.
Well,
And it's going to take probably another 10 years to build this thing. So the 3 Mile Island in the US, it's probably a one-off. There aren't a lot of nuclear plants just sitting around waiting to be turned back up. So I think that's part of the challenge. And then the small nuclear modular reactors, they're also very expensive, and they're not contributing a lot to energy.
Yes, and I think we also have to consider the consumer, right? Because you need also the acceptance, let's say normally to build something. And if you see here in Switzerland, 40% of the energy supply comes from nuclear. Yeah. But I would not like to build another one here, because I think you will wait at least 20 years. Even for a wind farm, it takes you already 6 to 10 years for one windmill, and I don't want to know how long that might be with the nuclear.
I'm sure people would like to have a nuclear power plant in their backyard, though.
For sure, for sure. If you come by train, you might pass.
Sign me up. How do I get a nuke in my
I
backyard?
would love to add up on
Not
that
in my
one.
backyard.
So, because I'm from France, I was born there. We've got something like 45 or 50 nuclear plants there. There is only one company in the world which recycle, and this is a French company. We actually export it in some countries, which is not very fine, and in some cases we are burying it under parking lots, supermarket stuff in France. So personally, I'm not in favor of nuclear.
So France, clearly the leader in nuclear power.
I know.
When is the last time they built a new nuclear power plant?
You are asking me too much.
Okay.
I'm not living in France.
Does anybody
in
here
30
know
years, so
the answer
I
to
don't
that?
Not when the last one was built, but currently many of them are going under maintenance. And actually that is putting now the energy system quite under stress locally. Interesting. And how it's solved then is again with the consumer and the consumer devices in a positive way. But we should also not forget that once everything is built, and if they go on maintenance, then they normally get dispatched from the grid for 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
That situation is much more likely a political issue. Yeah.
Right, so that's fission nuclear. What about fusion? So there are many companies here at Davos, I think many startups they're getting funded. What do we think about their ability to impact the next, let's call it 10 years?
They're startups. They're taking. How many times does a startup end up having something have mass adoption in the near term? I answered your question with a question.
How often does a startup predict something and it pushes out? I was going to say never. Never happens.
Well, once again, economics and politics are in the middle, you know. So.
But I think all of us we would like to have fusion, right? It would be good for the environment. Nobody's against it.
It's just, again, it's not a near-term solution.
Yeah, I would say for fusion, before we move on, I think all of us would like it. And even if it did come in the near term, which you probably won't, nobody's talked about how much this thing's going to cost. And if you've seen how complicated a fusion machine is, it does not look like something that is cheap. So, yeah. All right, why don't we move? Who was the person in the audience that asked about geothermal? Okay, I told you I would bring it up. What do we think about geothermal? Let's talk about geothermal and wind.
So, on my point of view, wind is very interesting, but we just need to change. 15 years ago, I was facing with some startup from Switzerland. They developed wind turbines on magnetic stuff, so no requirements of oil for the mechanic part. This company never got up. There is another interest, basically. So I love the wind stuff, but it depends really how we apply it and in which region, because it's very good, and at the same time it distracts a little bit the environment. So my point of view on wind is why don't we put it in the sea? This is the best place to.
Well, we know there's some certain person who doesn't like that, putting wind in the sea. We won't mention who that is.
And I would add, what do we do with all the wind turbines when we're done with them? Because that is a problem that has not been solved yet, and that's a lot of waste from them when we're done with them.
So I think that's really a regional question, right? I mean, with the wind farm, it's the same. No one is really liking to look at a windmill or anything in their backyard. But if you go offshore, for example, and I know there are other groups who do not like to go on offshore wind, right? But then it has all of a sudden a huge acceptance. On the geothermal space, and coming here from Switzerland, that's also quite specific, but it's really gaining attractiveness. But there, coming back to your initial question, you have the cost, right? Building as an end consumer a geothermal heating at home is around 70,000 Swiss francs. 70. I mean, who the hell can afford that in the short run, right? And there are almost no financing solutions. And if you go that then on a big scale, it might work better. But I think there we have to work a lot on getting the cost down.
I would love to add something on that one. So the geothermal, I'm not very good with it, but I think we really require a difference of temperature, which is not really possible in every place in the world, but many it's possible. Still, we've got 70% of the water on sea, and it's moving. So there are many solutions that we can deploy without disturbing the environment and use the power of the waves.
So here's my take on all of those. 10 years ago, geothermal, wind, wave technology, they were all interesting. They were getting funded a lot, but there was a tsunami that figuratively hit them, and that's solar. Because the fact that solar became down 90%, I think all these technologies looked viable, especially wind was cheaper than solar, but it's not anymore. I think that's one of the challenges that all these technologies have, that they work. But as we know, part of deploying energy, it's all about having the lowest cost solution. I think that's where we're seeing solar and batteries jump to preeminence, not because people are, there are benefits as we talked about it, but it really is all about economics at the end of the day. I think that's the challenge that I see with geothermal and wind. And I saw a startup founder pitching a wave technology, and he said, we aspire to get to 10 times more expensive than solar in the next 5 years. And I was like, that didn't like that pitch. Okay, great. Let's go back to fossil fuels, because clearly some of the mix that we have today is fossil fuels, and there are people building more coal plants, natural gas, maybe a derivative of that, hydrogen. What is our thinking on moving forward? And then I think there were some people talking in the panel earlier about how people are looking at fossil fuels not because they care about clean tech one way or another, they just want to make money. That is the world we live in. What are your thoughts about the future in the next 10 years of where gas and coal and fossil fuels will fit into our energy mix? Who wants to start?
I can take a start there. So originally I'm German. So we managed the exit from the nuclear power, right? And normally coal should also follow at one point in time, which I think in the long run is the right path. But what we need to see is that it's still too cheap, right? It's too cheap and therefore too competitive. And you see all the big companies like Shell, Total, others, right? Who have heavily invested also into renewables, also into new consumer solutions, they are all pulling the plug on that. And why is that? Because they can make still enough money on the fossil fuels. And in the end, they have to run a company and they need to, let's say, also show their returns to their investors. And this is mainly the reason why they are saying, well, I will go on with the fossil fuels. Interestingly enough, if there is a second threat coming, like we had with the energy crisis some years ago, then all of a sudden it's all around renewables again. But then the security threat is overlaying the return on investment. But in the short run, I don't see that they are really getting out of that.
I would say that we are going to still see some usage of fossil fuels, whether that's oil, natural gas, or coal. We're going to still see that, especially given that the incoming administration in the United States is more favorable to some of that. I do believe we do need all the energy we can get, and preferably that is clean and renewable energy. Now, you sort of alluded to something I was going to say. I think you were alluding to it, that we can't see a case where, like, you get rid of all the nuclear like Germany did, decommissioning, and then suddenly you run out of your source of imported fossil fuels, like we saw when Russia invaded Ukraine with all of that. So we need to make sure we are getting renewable systems in place, because we can't get rid of energy sources and then perhaps lose our only remaining source. So I think that's an important thing to consider, but we need to be really focusing on that transition. The question is, will we? That's and I don't have the answer to that one.
Fossil fuels have a couple advantages that are tough to argue with. One is the dependability. So 80% of grid outages in the United States is from weather-related events, from local outages that just aren't tooled to deal with it. So if we don't have a dependable, reliable source of energy, consumers will lose a lot of heart for the decarb and transition effort. The other thing is that we've had decades of practice on how to finance fossil fuels. We know how to build, it's a commodity, we know how to price it, we know how to trade it, we know how to make money on it. So we need some more at-bats with these new clean energy opportunities to demonstrate the opportunity to make money, to, I think, ultimately shift the market to replace fossil fuels. But until we actually have the level of reliability for consumers that we've had with fossil fuels, I think it's going to be tough to make a totally clean break.
So just to add up on that one, and I totally agree with what you just said, and to take what you said at the beginning, Total or whatever the company we mentioned, they would prefer to invest in a sustainable plant to clean their ass up, sorry for that, instead of changing technology because it costs too much at the moment. So until we find new technologies, coal is still going on. So.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that. I think by 2035, you're going to see the battery technology become much more robust in terms of medium, long-term storage. Because right now, the whole discussion we're having around fossil fuels is around, well, what if solar is not reliable, the wind's not blowing? But if you have batteries that can be working on demand in a second or microsecond, then that kind of alleviates that. But if you look in the next 10 years in the interim, probably natural gas is a good source for that. I think, by the way, interesting, natural gas, that's the best marketing of all time. It's methane.
Well,
right? Nothing natural about it. And then I would say coal, part of the problem that I'm seeing is that you can't get a 20 or 30 year loan to finance a coal plant because nobody believes they're going to be around in 2045, 2055. So coal is kind of dead. Natural gas can survive. But it seems to be where we need that as an interim, but hopefully batteries, if they're good enough, can substitute for that. I would just add one more thing. What I read for coal and natural gas plants is that they're really, really good when you finance them if you can run them all the time. And the problem with that is that when solar is the cheapest source and you're running it in the middle of the day, these gas and coal plants are becoming peakers. So once they go below 50%, they're actually not economical and you need to shut them down. So even the current plants, probably many of them will be shut down because they're no longer economical. And this is today, not looking forward.
Yeah, I think probably adding to that, there is an additional resource that we have not mentioned yet, and that is flexibility. Because we have currently just talked about the different sources of energy supply, but we can also align our demand, right? And that comes exactly to your point that you just mentioned. The wind is not always blowing, sun is not always shining. But instead of trying to solve the problem only from the supply side, we can also solve it from the demand side and aligning both of them much better.
So that was my last question, and then maybe we'll take one or two from the audience. Is more about demand generation, demand shaping, software, AI. I have to say it because you have to mention it once.
I love that one.
Everybody loves that word. What's the role of that in shaping our future of energy in the next 10 years? How
once
important
again,
will it be?
if I may, well, once again, it will depend on each government allowing the regulation per country. If you observe the big company providing at the moment, they are fighting to don't let you enter the game. So this is much more politic stuff than anything else. Once again, in Brazil at the moment, we are observing a change in the laws on the way we can provide energy to the grid and to the people. It might become a free market, as it is kind of in Europe, and that will change a lot because, as I mentioned a bit earlier, we cannot redirect some energy from Paraguay, for example, because it's too cheap. It doesn't go with Brazilian stuff or Argentinian stuff. But then when these markets are open, then we can redirect energy, and yes, AI is helping, and we have at the startup I'm working with, and then founder of, we are ready. We know how to redirect and organize that, so we can do it. The limit is not from us. I think the limits are much more from politics at the moment, my point of view.
Okay.
We've touched on a couple innovations around microgrids and storage, and I think both of those are the things that will ultimately increase demand for consumers to experience energy without clean energy without disruption, and that will be one of the main tipping points that ultimately people won't think about the difference between dirty and clean. They just know they have power to do the things they want to do to operate in the world. So that's what we need to be driving towards is, consistency and finding the right energy stack based on who you are and where you live.
I would add to that this is a very complex problem which until now could not readily be solved. The microgrids and being able to get energy from various sources that at various times of day, that when the sun ain't shining or the wind ain't blowing, you take all those variables into account. We could not do that before. Now that AI is coming into the picture, there is some real hope for a lot of that. And I would add on the political side of it, I would add the United States in here. I think we need to see more of this in rural areas and the microgrids in those areas, because there's a lot of large rooftops there that this can come from, and those are in the areas in the U.S. that are likely to, when there's a lot of demand for AI, they're likely to get the short end of that stick, and you're going to cause some political problems. Particularly, I'm talking U.S., but I imagine elsewhere that's similar. If you don't have production in those areas and have them benefit as well. So I think AI makes and other software technology makes so much of this easier to solve. We're not there yet, but I'm optimistic in that regard.
There I would like to add a bit more provocative. We are there. The solutions are existing, right? It's just that the utility does not earn a lot of money or does not know how to earn the money by adapting the demand to the supply. They are only familiar with selling you the energy contract, right, and kilowatt hours, but not how to sell you a saved kilowatt hour. And that's the huge difference, but we need that because we have an existing infrastructure, and we need to add to that infrastructure all the distributed energy resources. And they are coming because the consumers are building them up anyway, right? People are driving Teslas. There are charge points being deployed. People are going on geothermal heat pumps instead of normal gas heating. So it's coming anyway, and the solution is there, but now we need to get it out, right? From the panel before, we heard there is enough money, we have enough technology, and now it's really make it happen.
Do you need the utilities to cooperate with you or them, or do you think you could go and you and others can go around them? Do you need their help?
I think it's both. I mean, you see it in both ways, right? You see technology companies partnering with existing utilities. Then the major challenge is that you need to be patient, really patient. And then you have the newcomers, right? On the panel before there was NPAL. We had Octopus also talking on some panels, right? And they are the newcomers who build everything from scratch, and they just have a different starting point, and they can go quicker. And I think it will be a mix in the long run.
Okay. Why don't we take a question or two from the audience? Yes.
First, to your prior question, the last power plant in France came online in 2024, December, but it was 12 years after it was completed because of regulatory delays.
So 12 years after, and how much?
5 years to build.
Did you know about the overage cost? Like what?
once again.
Appreciation, everything figured out.
And
But
Put-
my question was, you guys were all pretty skeptical about fusion, or at least from a timeline perspective. And I wanted to challenge that a little bit because the crisis around power in Germany in particular has caused all the candidates for power, for example, to talk about fusion publicly. Ursula von der Leyen talked about it yesterday. And this idea of offsetting first of a kind risk by governments paying for it seems to be a real thing. And even utilities in Germany are looking at it, and they're trying to convert the old fission plants to fusion to kind of get around the regulatory problem as well. So that looks like it's going to accelerate a lot more, and I just wanted to see what you guys think about that, because that's what we're working on.
So I went to a couple of sessions this week where fusion power companies were talking, and most of them were like, we are going to have commercial fusion in the early 2030s.
No.
That's,
We are a fusion company, that's not what we're saying.
you're saying sooner than that?
No, the commercial will be later. First of a kind that is maybe not yet on the grid, but it's a pilot plant
Okay.
is 2035.
Yeah, so all right, and as we said earlier, no technology from a startup ever slips, ever.
No, it doesn't slip, of course not. But my point is when there's more capital behind it, and it depends on which approach you're doing. If you're doing magnetic confinement, it's much more material science,
And how much is this plant going to cost?
roughly $4 billion.
$4 billion?
And what you said actually matches what we said. You said you're first coming online 2035. That means that would not be mass adoption. So that's why I like fusion in the longer term. But in the near to middle term, you're still agreeing with what we said on the timing.
I am, but my point is public-partner sure could accelerate that time.
So $4 billion for how much power?
1 gigawatt.
No comments.
Well, but that is the first of a kind. When you look at the nth of a kind, LCOE is going to be way below everybody else. But
Okay. Is there another question?
I could do the same for geothermal since in some ways it's considerably further ahead than fusion. I represent a number of organisations. One is I'm the finance chair for the US Department of Energy GEO project, which is looking at how you transfer technology from oil and gas into geothermal, deep geothermal. I also consult for Project InSpace, which has I've got some cards here. They have a geothermal hot house in the Europe Hotel from 2 o'clock if anybody fancies to turn up. And I'm also a geothermal developer as well. But I just want to make some observations on what I heard because, of course, I'm steeped in the subject and obviously passionate about it. The IEA published a report in which I participated saying that they thought 15% of primary electrical energy could be geothermal by 2050. My calculation said 75%, which I published in 22. I'm working with the University of Austin, Texas University of Austin. And the reason for that is that we can deploy the oil and gas technology and the oil and gas rigs around the world. And if you use the oil and gas rigs and just drill geothermal wells from 2030 to 2050, that's how you achieve 75% of the primary electrical energy demand. And that's the IEA's figures, not mine. And I just want to say the other thing is that it load follows. So I think someone was talking about the importance of natural gas as a load follower. Well, everything that natural gas can do, geothermal can do better. And everything that nuclear can do, geothermal can do better, quicker, faster, and without the uranium problem at the end of the day. And finally, it's geothermal everywhere. So although we're looking in the US and the US is putting a lot of money to this, we're developing projects in the UK and in Taiwan and in Japan. And it gives you geopolitical security, which is something that we definitely could have done with before Russia invaded Ukraine. Because every single country can do this, and it only requires steel, sand, cement, washing up liquid and salt water, and a lot of technology.
So I think we all hope that happens. So same question: if fusion is $4 billion for a gigawatt, what would be in the 2030s? What would be the equivalent for geothermal?
Well, at the moment the LCOEs are of the order of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which means that we can sell it to California now. And we are looking for those to come down to around 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour in the next 5 to 10 years. There is a project right now drilling into a volcano in Oregon, and that project is accessing 375 centigrade water. Now, 375 centigrade water is almost half the efficiency of combined cycle gas turbines. You'll see the current the yield from 2 wells moving from 15 megawatts per well pair now to 100 megawatts per well pair within around 5 or 6 years.
Question.
What cost? What would be the cost for 1 gigawatt, for example?
So at the moment it's around $5,000, $5,000
To build the plant.
a kilowatt, and we're expecting that to drop to something close to 2,000 to 3,000 within a few years. So it'll start to become competitive with solar, mostly because in solar you've got to add batteries, whereas with geothermal we're 24/7, 365, and we load follow. And so I just wanted to ask you all to at least go to the geothermal house in the Europa Hotel at 2 o'clock. I'm actually not representing Project Innerspace on there. I just want to please just look at this seriously. No one has mentioned it. I asked you to mention it.
I promise you that I did, and I did.
Okay.
So I kept my promise.
It's crazy not to talk about it because it is right now, and we have so many oil and gas assets that we can use for geothermal.
Yeah, I imagine adapting existing infrastructure is going to be a lot cheaper than whole cloth building from scratch. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That will reduce the cost. Yeah.
Question for you. You say you're drilling into a volcano. Curious what if that causes any destabilization or safety issues, or what the ramifications might be there.
They're not drilling into the magma because, of course, the rock is extremely hot near the volcano. Okay. All you need to do is access the really hot rock.
So you're still in the crust.
That's right. Yes, right. You don't go into the magma. Right. You don't go anywhere near it. The magma's at sort of 900 or 1,000. You just get close enough to it to pick up the very hot rock.
Yeah. And are there any particular ramifications of using those wells? Because we know we've seen things like with fracking, people have talked about possibility for an increased earthquakes. When you retrofit and use that well technology, do you see any particular issues geologically with that?
I'm sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time, but just one point. People have been drilling geothermal wells into the wrong place. They drill them into fractures, into faults, thinking that's the thing to do. But if you drill into a fault and then you start pumping water through it, guess what? You lubricate the fault and the fault moves.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
But there's absolutely no reason to do that because the most interesting rock to drill is the dumbest rock, which is like granites which haven't moved for 400 million years, have no natural fractures in them, and you just go into those. They're natural radioactive, they're natural nuclear reactors because they contain uranium, thorium, and potassium. That's where the heat comes from. So you either go for magma or you go for deep geothermal into granites like there are in Utah now. So Utah's going to have 2 gigawatts of electricity from geothermal, which Microsoft, I think, and Alphabet are buying.
That's great. I think we may have time for one more question. Okay, well, what I would say, first of all, I think I want to say thank you to the panel. I think we covered a lot of ground. I think my takeaway from this is that even though there are a range of outcomes, there's a lot of optimism where we might be in the next 10 years, so it's not 30 or 50 years from now. And we obviously have a lot of work to do as a society, but hopefully we'll get there. So thank you to the panel. Thank you for all of you for coming, and have a great day.